everyone. My name is Kennedy Cole, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator for the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis at The Ohio State University. I'm excited to welcome you to our third webinar in the series, Data for Access and Opportunity. This series is co-sponsored by CURWIN, the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis at Ohio State, and the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. Throughout this series, speakers from various fields will discuss how data contributes to a more equitable world. Today, Kim M. Reynolds will discuss critical data studies research and how it intersects with data governance, policy, and discursive regimes. Before we introduce Kim, I want to mention a few logistical items. If you require closed captioning today, you'll find a box at the bottom of the screen labeled with CC. Click the box and select Show Subtitles. This will allow you to view subtitles during the presentation. During the webinar, feel free to submit questions at any time using the Q&A box. We will ask as many of your questions as we can in the last portion of the presentation. And if we do not get to your question, apologies in advance. Chat has been disabled, so please use the Q&A if you have any information to share with the organizers. As you may have seen on our website, this event is approved for 1 AICP CM credit. To claim your CM credits, log into your My APA account on the APA website and enter the event into your online CM event log. There will be a brief survey at the end of the webinar. If you have time, we encourage you to provide your feedback to improve these events. If you have any additional questions following this event, you can email us at cura@osu.edu. To learn more about CURWIN's research and future events, visit curwin.osu.edu. You can learn more about Cura at cura.osu.edu and MORPC at morpc.org. Now I'd like to turn things over to Dave Dixon, Director of Data Analytics and Strategy at MORPC, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Kennedy, and good morning, everyone. I am very excited to introduce Kim Reynolds. Kim is a writer and critical media scholar and tech researcher from Ohio, based in Cape Town, South Africa for the past 7 years. Kim holds 2 master's degrees in critical media and communications from the London School of Economics and Political Science in London School of Economics and Political Science and the University of Cape Town. Kim focuses on the overlapping contemporary social justice and arts histories on the continent of Africa and the US. She writes and teaches on critical media and queer theories, and her writing has been published in the poetry anthology Woven with Brown Thread, alongside over 30 arts and politics bylines with the Mail and Guardian, Vice, and the Johannesburg Review of Books. Additionally, in 2024, she was chosen as one of 12 residents at the Library of Africa and the African Diaspora, LOATAD, in Accra, Ghana. Reynolds is currently a co-lead of US-based research and organizing collective, Our Data Bodies. In 2020, ODB was recognized in the New York Times as part of their Good Tech Awards. So with that introduction, I am very excited to welcome Kim and looking forward to today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Dave, Kennedy, Harvey, Andrea, for all the work you put in to make the webinar happen. And thank you for such a robust bio. I think I need to shorten it, quite a mouthful. So thank you very much. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm very happy to be with you. I'm coming to you from Cape Town, South Africa, but happy to be here in Ohio in a way. I was born and raised in Cincinnati and went to Ohio University actually. But before I get ahead of myself, I'd like to intro what we'll be talking about today. The topic of discussion and kind of where I want to maybe lend some of my work and the work that I do with Our Data Bodies is around carceral tech and particularly surveillance technology. So as a humanities student, a forever student, as well as a teacher, I like to start off with an agenda and note that I like to ground these conversations in the history of surveillance and in the history of semiotics and the history of anti-Blackness and the kind of convergence of all of these things, or the way that they work together. So the introduction, I'll introduce a little bit more about myself and who ODB is, the work that we do, kind of the forms that our work takes on. I also want to include kind of a free write or an independent think. I know that the chat is disabled, so if folks want to write it down on their device or on a nearby notepad and pen, but we'll take like 2 minutes to think about the question, what's in my wallet and what information did I have to give up to get it? This exercise comes from an ODB exercise, but it's also to ground the conversation in a more material way. A lot of conversations about technology and kind of its omnibus bad things can feel very abstract. And so this exercise is really great because I think it starts to bring out kind of the ways that data is collected on you and how that manifests into the physical world and how that manifests into the access that we have to the physical world. So all of the information you must give up to get your driver's license or now your real ID necessitates quite a few things that then can deny access to quite a few people, and denying access to ID obviously is quite a slippery slope of denial of access of so many things, you know, largely or kind of what comes to mind often is voting, but so many other forms of access for necessary amenities in this life. So we'll take 2 minutes to think about that, and then maybe we can revisit it in the Q&A. And then I want to talk a lot about, you know, the kind of origins of surveillance technology, which cannot be spoken about without talking about the transatlantic slave trade, and the kind of development of policing and surveillance in concert with anti-Blackness and the project of colonialism broadly. So we'll take some time to talk about that. We'll also talk kind of about, again, kind of from the humanities side of things, the semiotics of surveillance, the kind of usage of imagery and certain kinds of imagery and the exaggeration of different kinds of features in order to justify who is considered a threat and who is considered then to be surveilled and who is not. And then finally, I'll try and spend the bulk of my time talking about perhaps the work I can lend most relevantly to today's topic, which is talking about our data body's work called Tracked and Targeted. So in 2023 and 2023 to 2024, we carried out a project and published a report. But this was a participatory research project where we interviewed over 20 people who worked previously or currently work in Amazon fulfillment centers across the US. I won't take too much time to talk about it because I'll spend a lot of time with it. But I want to note that that's where a lot of, hopefully I can, you know, lend some insight around what workplace surveillance looks like. And again, how that's connected to a much larger system of carceral technology. So the report is definitely indicts Amazon, but it's a much bigger indictment of, you know, growing connected surveillance systems that can be utilized for nefarious purposes. And then I'll talk a little bit about resistive strategies. So ODB is very big on not just, you know, diagnosing and critiquing issues, but trying to build power collectively through understanding what these issues are. So our kind of ethos is storytelling as research. But I can continue on. Oh, and I just want to acknowledge the artist credit is Linda Ndila, has unfortunately passed away, but a brilliant South African artist. And I think that this picture, you know, talks a lot about distortion. And I think that that will come up a lot in what we will be talking about. So just to speak a little bit more about ODB. So our data bodies is a research and organizing coalition. And our work takes the form of publication and of like workshop facilitation and kind of building community power. Our main focus is understanding how big data, surveillance, and technology can reproduce marginalization in the world. And we focus our work largely in the US and in South Africa, you know, via me being the only ODB member based in South Africa. So this is our team here: Blue Lewis, Mariela Saba, Dr. Sita Panyaganganharan, and then me, Kim. Our work, you know, again, importantly teeters this space of research and organizing. So these are our partner organizations. Many people on the team are connected to these organizations, if not directly working for them or running for them. But we have the Center for Community Transitions in Charlotte, Detroit Community Technology Project, Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, and Open Secrets here in South Africa, which is an organization I work with quite regularly. And then I think I can share also a little bit about myself. So I know bio happened, but I just want to say it's great to be here again. I grew up in Cincinnati, and I went to Ohio University, and of course had a lot of friends that went to OSU. So it's really great to be in Ohio, but also to contribute to the great work that that you're doing here at Cura in partnership with a number of other organizations. So thank you again. It's great to be here. And then I will, formally start to now talk a little bit about ODB's outputs. So these are two pieces of publication, or this is one publication of ours, quite a large publication. So this is called our Digital Defense Playbook. It's a popular education book. It was published in 2019, launched formally at the New School in New York. And this is a culmination of 250 interviews carried out across 3 US cities, that being Charlotte, Detroit, and LA, again, where where our team is based. And we carried out these interviews asking, and the ethos of the interview was asking folks what kind of data is being collected for the purposes of housing and re-entry. So people who are experiencing housing insecurity and people who are also experiencing re-entry from incarceration. And again, this is really what drove a lot of our research as storytelling, in asking questions about how much information is needed in order to navigate these kinds of systems, was extremely illuminating. And so, over 250 interviews is a lot to collate. So the popular education tool that comes out of this is quite a number of workshops and kind of community activities that help start to pull out all of these ways to understand how data and information is collected, and also ways to start becoming aware of it, to start building strong coalitions against discriminatory technology, and to understand what kinds of discriminatory technology are at play. So the Digital Defense Playbook is a really wonderful resource, in my opinion. It is available for free or for purchase if you wanted to support ODB. You can find it at alliedmediaprojects.org at their storefront. But this is a major output of ODB, and I think is used quite a bit in different civil society kind of circles. So that's the Digital Defense Playbook. And then the other two kind of projects I want to also highlight is Tracked and Targeted. So we called this internally ODB at Work, but I'll speak a lot about this, and I kind of already alluded to it. But again, this is our work that examined workplace surveillance at Amazon fulfillment centers. This was a participatory research project, meaning that it was ethics cleared, and we did kind of a snowball interview process. And we also worked with United for Respect in order to start to build a safe and trusting interview pool of people who were willing to speak to us about Amazon, in ways that allow people to come forward. It's really important to never kind of have a leading question per se, but to simply ask people, how much surveillance is at play when it comes to Amazon? And perhaps the spoiler is that there is a lot. And then another project that we've done is abolishing carceral tech. So this was a track of a Allied Media Projects conference that ODB helped facilitate. Again, a lot of illuminating discussions and projects came out of this. We're able to spotlight quite a few things. And another project that we carried out that I didn't have a screenshot for, but I'll talk about at the end of our time together, is our oral histories project. So we interviewed over 15 people who work in resisting discriminatory technology. So we spoke to lawyers in Puerto Rico, we spoke to activists in the US, and we also spoke to activists and cultural workers here in South Africa and in Zambia. And all these oral histories were documenting the kinds of work that people are doing across various fields that deal with discriminatory technology, and ways that they were building power or resistance to it, either kind of individually in an artistic way in writing, or legally in coalition with other lawyers, or activists building kind of community power and taking to local or national governance. So that's a little bit about ODB. And again, I'll talk a lot more about tracked and targeted as we go along. But I want to take about 2 minutes here to respond to the question, what is in my wallet and what information did I give up to get it? So I will keep track of the time. I think we have 2 minutes from here. If folks want to just, take some time to think about what is in your wallet and what information do you have to give up to get it. And then I know we can't speak now, but I'll share some reflections from over the years as we've done this exercise. Cool.
As a reminder to everyone, the Q&A is open, and so you can type your feedback in there and we'll be able to see it.
Oh, great. Thank you. We'll take about 30 more seconds. Okay, everyone. I think we can come back into the room. Thank you for having to think about it. I guess I can share kind of observations that have come up over the years of working with ODB. People often talk about having to give up, in the US, often our social security number is a huge identifying factor that is needed to get your ID, to get your medical card, kind of insurance cards, things like that. In the case of being a non-US citizen, people give up so much more in terms of bank statements, in terms of travel itinerary, in terms of proof of invitation if you're traveling for business. So much is needed in terms of getting the visa that exists in your passport. 2 years ago, when myself and a colleague from Open Secrets were doing this exercise in Costa Rica at a conference, someone noted that they had to give up their blood type in order to get a visa. And that just kind of speaks again to just how much information is materialized into these kinds of physical access cards that are needed to be able to navigate everyday life and also navigate the kind of insurance of your everyday life. Your insurance on your car, your insurance on your life, your insurance on your house all necessitates these kinds of formal tracking and these formal information collection systems. The next thing I want to kind of build upon to talk about this is talking about Simone Brown's work. This is a widely cited piece of literature in the field of kind of social justice oriented technology, but Simone Brown wrote a book called Dark Matters on Surveillance of Blackness. And this is from, I think, chapter 1. So if you ever take a read, you'll find this early on. But she references this surveillance assemblage. And she talks about how this concept is about breaking down a human being from its territorial setting and then reassembling a person somewhere else. And so when you're reassembled as a person in a data collection site that often looks like a credit report database, a police database, or kind of an immigration database. And so you can kind of see how you might be stripped of all the things that make you a human being and have to be reconstructed elsewhere in a more legible more scrutinous way. And importantly, Simone also takes us into a racialized understanding. So a lot, especially in the humanities, you have theories of justice, but some of them can't always hold when you apply race to the concept. Things start to falter a bit. It kind of the same debate around the founding ideologies of the United States, for example. All men are created equal, however, who is considered equal, who's even considered a man in the situation, or in the understanding, the definition, the very definition itself. So when she applies race to the understanding of surveillance, she talks about how racializing surveillance is a technology of social control, where surveillance practices, policies, and performances concern the production of norms pertaining to race and exercise a power to define what is in or out of place. So carceral technology is, by definition, is technology that supports the carceral state, the police state. And the development of carceral technology is deeply intertwined with the alteration and the mutilation of humanity via globalized anti-Blackness and the transatlantic slave trade. And so these ideologies that informed and justified this mass splintering of the world also created different kinds of technologies to retain that kind of supremacy. So while it seems a little perhaps far-flung, it's not too far of a reach to talk about minstrelsy. So these, in the early 20th century in the United States, in the early 1900s, minstrelsy has a heyday, vaudeville performances. And so this is when white performers would burn cork and then rub the ash all over their faces and play caricatures of what they considered to be Black Americans or emancipated slaves. And so this was a huge entertainment of cruelty, obviously deeply dehumanized Black Americans, and also legitimized slavery and material violence and physical violence towards people who were made to be into a caricature or made to be into kind of 4 different stereotypes, generally being, the town fool, the criminal, the aggressor, or the mammy that supported the family structure. And so the human freak show, which is kind of the precursor for the circus, so Barnum and Bailey's circus kind of has this history in the human freak show, is also a part of this. So this is what was foundationally defining racial categories. And so to be in the human freak show in the early 1900s, particularly as a white person, was to fail a certain category of your assigned racial or sexual identity. So characters like the small person or the bearded woman were failures of your assigned category of able-bodied cis white person. But to be a human freak in the freak show as a non-white person was simply just to be. And your culture, your attributes, your features were highly scrutinized and made fun of, and often studied and legitimized as human differences amongst that differed from a superior and naturalized identity of white, making everyone else other. And so the freak show and minstrelsy set up this stark identity formation where a natural and a neutral human is established, and that is the spectator, and that is the person who is not a freak, who is considered a white cis heterosexual white person, and then that then creates an anchor identity, an inferior, a non-human, a freak, and so all of this feeds into surveillance technologies, because Simone Brown also talks a lot about lantern laws. So there are these laws that were put in place that, again, were to surveil slave plantations. And so concurrently, at the same time, in the earliest 20th century, the immense wealth produced by the 400 years of slavery in the United States bolsters a very strong military and lots of investment into military technologies. So it's useful. It's useful to talk about the kind of military origins of a lot of technologies that we use every day that are considered household goods. So radio, telephone, drone cameras, guns, and kind of any day usage cameras. Anything from film cameras to obviously our digital photographs to now what is considered, your Amazon Ring cameras. All of these things have kind of a military origin. And so when these things get normalized and naturalized as everyday technology, they kind of lose the antagonism and the possibility for those things to then become something that can be used in a nefarious way or be a vehicle to carry out bias. And so home surveillance cameras like Amazon's Ring camera normalize the surveillance and create a binary of us and them and a safe and unsafe. I mean, this is not a totalizing, assessment. Sometimes these cameras, or oftentimes these cameras, offer safety to people who are marginalized, again, by systems of power, whether it be patriarchy or the police, or racism, right, or anti-Black racism. But further, our everyday tech can quickly become co-opted by surveillance systems. So when OpenAI takes a $200 million government contract with the US Department of Defense, it then starts to become a little bit muddied about how this technology is used and for what purpose. And so other examples include the police accessing Amazon Ring footage, images from robotic vacuums training AI in military navigation. Most famously, the Roomba vacuum gets its navigational technology from military technology. So the way the robot is able to avoid bumping into your shoes or bumping into your trash can is the same thing it was using when being trained to avoid certain kinds of mines and other traps for military navigation. And then also zip codes become the basis for gang databases. There are several, kind of most infamously is the one in Chicago, and they become very difficult to get out of. But this kind of blurring of the private sector technology and the incorporation and the cooperation with large governments expands and has the potential to expand the police state through private networks. So this is kind of an expansion of carceral tech. So with all of that in mind, it's then worth speaking about how this translates into the private space, or how that's exercised in a private space like Amazon, which again has a lot of government cooperation, and where a lot of technology that is founded and tried out and born out of Amazon labs often find their ways into various military contracts, not just in the United States, but elsewhere. So I want to take a little bit of time to talk about Tracked and Targeted. So Tracked and Targeted, again, was a participatory research project where we carried out 20 interviews with people who formerly worked or currently work at Amazon fulfillment centers across the US. All of these interviews were thematically coded, and so many different insights came out of it, a very heterogeneous pool, but there were major commonalities across people's experience of Amazon. And so the way we then structured and designed our report was to create 4 composite characters who represent we attempt to represent a kind of person that we spoke to, and also the kinds of experiences that many people graciously lent us in their interviews. Again, this was carried out and couldn't have been done without United for Respect, which is a workers' organization. They support and capacitate lots of different worker movements. And again, the kinds of folks we talked to were people who worked in the fulfillment centers, but people who also drove vehicles. And also one person we spoke to was kind of middle management. So a lot of times you have a fulfillment center, and then you have a management team that ensures that quantity, quota, and productivity are being achieved. So those were some of the kinds of entry-level positions that were kind of excavated through these interviews, and people spoke to us about what their responsibilities were. But I think it's best to read a little bit from this report, which again is free to access on our website, odbproject.org. And yeah, so Malcolm is one of our composite characters. So I'll just read a little bit about it, and I'll point out some things I think will be useful to hold in mind as we get towards the end of the talk. So Malcolm writes, More or less, I work the graveyard shift at Amazon. I say goodbye to my wife at 8:30 p.m., hop in my car, arrive at the warehouse around 9:30 p.m. This is a huge facility, so it's like 28 full-size football fields of a building block, like close to 2 miles long. I park in the lot and I have a ways to go before entering the building. I got my head on right at the start of the shift, so I remember to grab my badge, which is essentially my ticket to get into the building. And then basically for everything that I need to do at any time, like how Amazon knows what I'm doing at any given moment. So I clock in at 2:30 a.m. and then I have about 5 to 7 minutes to get to the place where I'm going to be for the next 10 hours. The way it works is like I'm standing there and imagine there's a dresser with a Roomba underneath. It's like the way this place is designed, it's impossible to do good. Initially, it seems doable. When I started, I was in good shape. I was in the military. I was not too bad for my age. And when I started at Amazon, I'd be scanning and trying to hit my targets. And when I was at my peak, I was scanning about every 8 or 9 seconds. That's like 360 items per hour, or that's like 1,100 every 3 hours. But who can keep up at that? And then they'll come back at you and say that they saw that you hit 1,100, but that you're not hitting that anymore. And that's a productivity write-up right there. So some of the things and how we also informed these composites were to pick out the repeated issues of productivity and surveillance that came up throughout all of these interviews. So we used some direct quotes, but again, we ended up kind of writing these characters ourselves. And so importantly, something to note about the kind of productivity and surveillance technology that's being used is that Malcolm mentions that while he clocks in at 2:30 a.m., he has 5 to 7 minutes to get to the place where he's going to be for the next 10 hours. We also mentioned how big the facility is that there is about 2 miles of warehouse to get through, and that also then opens you up for 2 miles of space to cover when you are scanning and collecting things. We also highlight the badge here, so the Amazon badge as also a means of complete surveillance in terms of knowing where you are at any given moment, where you've scanned in and out, all these various checkpoints, if you will. And then the last thing is the scanner gun, which is used to measure, very obviously measure the items that are being scanned, but then feed into a productivity quota, and how then keeping up with the quota that you might set on a good day can then be used against you on perhaps just an average day. And our next excerpt that I think, again, illuminates this is someone called Nia. So I'll read a little bit from her excerpt as well. Nia says, "It's a lot on you. They got the pressure on you to get your number down. And that's got us on alert and doing everything we can. Like we figured out how to hack the scanner though. It's easy. It's like you swipe out of the app and then you scan your item and then the timer goes back on. So it's like we steal some time here. We're cheating. There's no time off task. We got it down. We never go home on time though. Some lady, she had a heart attack a couple weeks ago. She probably had been doing doubles like the shift I had. It's so much stress. There are mornings where I'd just be waking up and I'm just crying before work. It sucks." And so the thing that's being really highlighted here and that a lot of respondents spoke to us about was the scanner gun and this issue of being off task. So Amazon has a tracking method that's called time off task. And so if you do not scan an item in 2 minutes or less, you are considered off task. It can become a strike against you, firstly, but it also then triggers a manager to come find your location and inquire about why you are not scanning. The other issue that's being raised here is, sorry, excuse me. The other issue that's being raised here is the amount of physical stress. So again, both the distance, but also the demand of the shift. Neo mentions having a colleague that had a heart attack. Just from the sheer stress and physicality of the work, of keeping up with the work and avoiding punishment. So this is the glossary that we ended up kind of defining the different kinds of surveillance technologies that Amazon uses. And in the next slides, I will talk kind of about the bigger implications. So it's not just about for us understanding, what the software is and what the hardware is, but it's understanding the effect that that is having on people, but also the precedent it sets for labor in the United States. It sets a very worrying precedent about the exploitation of labor and the extreme harsh and faceless conditions. So these are some of the technologies that we spoke about: loss prevention cameras, which I'll speak about in the next slide. Netrodyne is a app that is installed on the phones of those who are driving Amazon trucks. This is meant to, again, track your productivity. When you're driving an Amazon truck, there are usually cameras inside your vehicle, outside the vehicle, and on your phone. The app ensures that you are being productive so that you don't open up your text messaging or your social media, things like that. It can, severely be used against you, especially if you need to take a call while you are on your shift. There are several metal detectors and security checks. Again, this kind of then elicits a sense of distrust and a sense of loss prevention. There's a sense of security that is only extended to fulfillment centers and entry-level jobs, which then communicates a sense of distrust for workers who work in these settings that are never extended to upper management buildings and to headquarter buildings, for example. I live in Observatory in Cape Town, and that is about 5 minutes away from the new Amazon headquarters that was set up here in Cape Town. And so there are no metal detectors and no heavy security checking every single employee that works in the tech side of things or in the middle management side of things, but that exists heavily for fulfillment centers. And so it communicates, again, a huge level of punishment and distrust. Again, the last thing I want to say is that these predictive technologies around scanning and communicate a bigger issue around productivity and almost a mechanical productivity. As we know, as human beings, every day is not the same. Even the sun and the moon do not operate the same way every single day. There are seasons, there are different responses. And so quantity quotas, productivity quotas do not allow for you to have a sick day, to have a day where your knee hurts, to have a day where you have a headache. It demands a consistent and high output every single time. And then the last thing I want to speak about as we get close to wrapping up here are the metal detectors, the additional security checks, clear plastic bags. Some fulfillment centers also require employees to have clear backpacks and clear bags in order to be able to see what is in your bag as a loss prevention tactic. But what also these things do is also reduce one's ability to be able to even know who your colleagues are. As Malcolm mentioned, if you clock in at 2:30 a.m. and you only have 5 to 7 minutes to get to your station, that means that you cannot say hi to another colleague. It means that you can't have a coffee and settle in for the morning or for the night, whatever that might mean. So it also it completely creates a structure of unfamiliarity. And so a lot of things that came back also from our interviews were folks talking about no one knowing anyone's name, and that there's such a high turnover of staff, as well as a high recidivism rate. People, it's very easy to get hired, to get fired, and then to get rehired at Amazon, that there is kind of a callousness that can arise because all anyone is trying to do is meet quota and not try to know one another, because if fulfillment center employees are trying to meet quota and they don't, then the managers are not meeting their quota of ensuring that fulfillment centers are meeting their quota. So it's kind of a top-down chain of almost arbitrary or mechanical definitions of productivity. And all of this feeds into a level of surveillance, and yeah, it automates and cements systems of discipline. So there's a huge punitive culture at Amazon. I'm going to kind of go through the next pieces quite quickly. Again, this kind of comes from the report, but these were some of the common themes. Pervasive surveillance in the workplace connects to pervasive mental health struggles. A lot of respondents talked about going into Amazon feeling somewhat physically able-bodied and also like mentally okay, and coming out of Amazon feeling very different. And I don't find that to be a huge exaggeration. A lot of people spoke extensively about anxiety, not to mention physical injury, and also having to prove your physical injury. So that's what a functional capacity exam is. I know I kind of glossed over it, but Amazon also doesn't pay for, they might pay for the first or second one, but if you have to continuously prove that you have a limited ability, ability capacity, you have to continuously pay for exams that demonstrate that. And so, yeah, these are some of the themes that came out of that. And maybe some of the takeaways that I would also kind of highlight here is that Amazon and large scale multinational companies prey on precarity, and workplace surveillance is a major tool to kind of ensure, again, this that can ensure a high turnover rate, as well as a high recidivism. Efficiency demands routine and consistency and sameness out of every person. And the cooperation between the state, whatever the state may be, whether it be a national government or a local government, and monopolize wealth of the private sector, limit diversity in speech, reach, movement online and off. So the kind of huge clamping down of union movements, especially within Amazon branches, are a huge indicator of that. And so how do you resist any of these things? So it's not, it's some of these things apply in some of our scenarios and some of them don't. Community can be very difficult to foster in various kinds of scenarios. So it's not meant to be a totalizing answer. Sometimes your neighbors are not people you want to build with or that you can build with for systemic reasons. Here in South Africa, the legacy of colonialism still affects many neighborhoods, forced removals. So community cannot possibly combat years of colonialism and forced removals and the issues that arise out of that in terms of crime and things like that. So I don't say it romantically, but in the spaces where it can be, understanding a community and your proximity of where one can live can help combat surveillance in terms of knowing and building a sense of trust. Supporting Amazon unions is a great way to kind of resist divesting from technology that tracks you and considers alternative means to convenience. I'm hoping I've been able to illustrate that there's a huge cost to the culture of convenience, and turning off tracking settings on all your different kinds of devices, because again, it can be, oftentimes it's used in marketing, but can be escalated to a different kind of tracking beyond just getting ads for things you might not need. And then the last thing I want to highlight and uplift is kind of an excerpt from our oral histories project. So oral histories of surveillance. We interviewed Trinae Morin. Trinae was also featured in the popular Netflix documentary Coded Bias. So this is an excerpt from her interview in that documentary. We also interviewed her, I think, a couple of years before that documentary came out. But Trinae's story is about her organizing her community in Brooklyn to resist facial recognition technology implementation in her apartment block. So kind of working with the Housing Community Renewals and Brooklyn Legal Center, they were able to submit an application that outrightly stopped the implementation of facial recognition technology in her building. She also spoke about how her building was already highly surveilled through key fobs, and those key fobs only being distributed to people who are on the lease. And if someone was found to be using a key fob who was not on the lease, it was flagged as almost an immediate strike against you in your housing, in the sense of housing. So it was a way to also kind of build a case against you as a untenable tenant. So Trinae also shared with us that one of her mother's friends came in from church, and the security at the reception office immediately flagged it as someone who didn't live there and therefore was in violation of their building codes. And so, yeah, I guess this is a great example of how to, if one can, organize a community to resist this. And so they were able to submit an application, and the facial recognition technology was foregone. And I think we're right at 45 minutes. So I think I will stop here. I'll just leave this slide up and open it up to Q&A. Thank you.
Kim, thank you so much. That was wonderful and very informative. Really, really glad you were able to come share this with everyone today. What we're going to do now is I'm going to ask a handful of questions from the teams here that collaborating on the webinar. Um, it's never too early to start putting your questions into the Q&A as well. We'll make sure we have plenty of time to get to those. So Kennedy will be monitoring that Q&A while I start asking a few questions we had prepared. Okay, so let's jump in here. So the first question is, can you elaborate on how storytelling and community-informed research shape ODB's methodology and findings?
Definitely, that's a great question. So maybe I can also speak into the future. ODB will continue this workplace surveillance work here in Cape Town. And so I think for us, you know, our storytelling as research approach is really about asking questions about our experiences. And we don't view ourselves as, as solely as researchers. We work in the communities that we live in, and we consider what are the different kinds of experiences that we're having at the hands of bigger systems in our spaces. And so through asking those questions, a bigger story starts to emerge. And so maybe, for example, with talking to folks who are experiencing reentry, there's, we would only know, and what we know about reentry in the carceral system is only through people collating their stories about how difficult it is to get a job, to access housing, to deal with the social stigma of incarceration, how to adhere to the various fees that are imposed on you both while you're incarcerated and you're out of the system and perhaps on parole, the kind of huge recidivism issues that are built into the system. And so I guess for us, once these stories start to, you can draw a line through stories, you can draw a much more clear line on what can be done in response to this. So we only know that something is malfunctioning when we start to experience it and when we can identify and also say no. So I think that's how we try to filter. That's how we try to filter both ourselves and our knowledge, and also the knowledge that is built by so many other organizations and coalitions and people in general. So yeah.
All right, thank you very much for that. And you started to touch on this a little bit. Um, and so thinking about urban spaces where we have public housing, transit systems, smart city initiatives for monitoring people and activities and utilities and all sorts of things. Um, how do you see that manifesting? So I'll play devil's advocate for a second. I'm a data director at a regional planning organization. So we're like
Mm-hmm.
always trying to collect data, right? For
Mm-hmm.
what we think is better planning, right? The more we know, the better we can plan, all of that, right? So when you think about everything that's going on, where things are moving to kind of like this mass collection by a diaspora of entities, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that playing out? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think what's quite difficult is that I think sometimes our ideas of development and progress are linked to digitization. So maybe I can give an example, maybe here in South Africa, and I'll also speak to the transit, the transit systems or maybe a smart city. But here in South Africa, things like government grants, what are called SASSA grants, which are given out to a number of people for a number of reasons: pensioners, retired people, people who are not physically or who are differently abled, people who adopt children. There's lots of different kinds of grants. And so painstakingly, some of these grants are administered at post offices or other kind of government buildings. And so that means that people must take transport, travel out, wait in a long queue to then get that. And so the idea to kind of to make that convenient, to make that more streamlined, is to then make it digital. But then that kind of raises other issues around things like language. So if you digitize a service, doesn't mean that it's always in English. In South Africa, there are 12 official languages, if you can consider sign language, but the government number is 11. And there's obviously issues of remnants of colonialism and the domination of languages like English and Afrikaans. And so digitizing something then brings into that. It also brings into the question of like data. So in the US, data and cell phones are quite, readily, used by lots of different kinds of people. But here in SA, I think that the data rates are the highest in any African country than they are in South Africa. And so then that requires, so it's this compounding factor. So I think in cities with transit systems and smart cities, it becomes very difficult to, I don't know, there's something around accounting for numbers and peak times and how to capacitate something better. But I think it can also unnecessarily track the personal entity rather than, the general public. And so kind of an ID number is always attached to your face, which is always attached to your camera, which is always attached to a system. It doesn't allow for, I don't know, just an off day, a different day, and also kind of introduces questions of recognition. So I think trans people speak a lot about the issues of trying to obtain identity that matches their gender identity, and people whose gender identity also changes quite regularly. People who change their names for legal reasons, for marriage, but also to reflect their gender identity, starts to bring in those questions. And all of that kind of data is also input by people. So in the US, oftentimes the hegemony of one surname, one first name and one last name is what dominates our data inputs. But when people have multiple names, hyphenated names, it then can create a system of discrimination or bad data entry. And then people have issues. And this people who are going to have issues are people who are oftentimes not quote unquote from the US. And so therefore can have this compounding issue. So that's kind of, I guess, my take on it.
All right. This is really fascinating. We had a prior session on identifying invisible groups, right? And the angle there is there are a lot of groups who are underrepresented in data or not captured in data at all. And there's a desire to track, right? To better serve, right? To not be invisible, to make sure that programs and services are impacting those that you're
Yeah.
trying to help. So you've given me a lot to think about. Kind of coming at it from both sides there. You
Yeah.
spoke a lot about the enslavement, oppression, marginalization of Black people and people of color. Could you talk a little bit about how surveillance systems disproportionately impact those communities?
Sure. I think they disproportionately impact um, Black Americans, people of color, and particularly Indigenous people, because they were designed to dominate and to eliminate those people. That's kind of where the origin lies. The idea of putting up a fence somewhere and creating private property, the colonization of land, the manifest destiny, the Trail of Tears, the kind of the mass genocide of Indigenous people, was all in service to create territory and therefore delineate who is entitled to that territory, who's safe in it, and who is a threat to the outside of it, creating a very crude, binary of us and them. And so surveillance systems, kind of go hand in hand with these ideological presumptions around, who is a criminal, who is a threat, where dysfunction lies. A major thing in African American studies is talking about the Moyer report, which kind of set the stage for criminalizing Black women and Black single mothers as overly reliant on the state. And so therefore, when a certain group of people is considered to always be dangerous, to always be participating in crime, overrepresented in the police system because it is constantly upon people, it therefore, disproportionately impacts them, impacts us. And so, and even, there's the long history of redlining and Jim Crow, but also the outright, domestic wars that have been waged on Black Americans throughout the entirety of the United States history. So you have the MOVE bombing in Philadelphia, where an entire community is bombed by the US government. You have, kind of various mob burnings of Black affluent neighborhoods in the South and kind of in the Midwest and things like that. And so I think that because these systems were designed with that kind of cruelty and ideological impetus, it still plays out in that way, as much as it seems far-fetched and slavery was so long ago. It's a huge fallacy. All of those things have just simply evolved. So yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you. Okay, well, we promised folks they would get a chance to ask questions. I see that we have two in the chat now. So thank you again so much. I'm going to turn things over from here on out to Kennedy to handle the audience Q&A.
Oh, Kennedy, I think you're muted. Sorry.
Kennedy, you are muted.
I think you're muted. You're muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I was just saying, Kim, that was such an informative presentation, and specifically the points you touched on regarding the Amazon report that you guys did and the surveillance disparities between the fulfillment centers and the headquarters. I think that's really interesting, and I'm sure that applies to many large companies. So that's really interesting. But yeah, we do have a couple of questions that I want you to have the chance to answer. Someone asked, has there been any legal pushback against surveilling workers?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not enough. I think these kinds of first steps are, there's not, I think the kind of regulation is growing day to day, kind of depends, but the issue with kind of, yeah, like the private sector is that there's a little bit less regulation on, you know, how much surveillance is too much. I think some of that work has really been led actually by Amazon unions, which has been negotiating labor. But to my knowledge, and I can't say that, yeah, and so, but I can't say that I've been, you know, up to snuff, I would say up to date with exactly the legal pushbacks that folks have been fighting. I think people have been mostly fighting the kind of the conglomeratization, the monopolization of Amazon beyond, excuse me, beyond the proliferation of the surveillance. Yeah, that's a great question. I'll look into it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I especially feel like there's more pushback with government surveillance versus private, which is really interesting that
Yeah.
it goes unnoticed. We have
Mm.
another question for you.
Mhm.
Can you share your perspective on how health researchers should balance the need for detailed active surveillance systems for the express intent to improve health outcomes and equity? For example, a cancer registry with a person's address, health status, socioeconomics, and more, and privacy slash anti-racism?
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I'll answer that question to the best of my ability. Because again, I think also, you know, Dave was also pointing towards it, is that you know, inherently that data collection shouldn't be a terrible thing. The impetus or the kind of impulse that we have around trying to standardize things and make things more streamlined, have a better picture for things not to be so ambiguous, would ideally result in like better systems. But I think sometimes because the bias, because the collection that the collection markers that we have end up telling a picture and still having stereotypes and things attached to them. So your socioeconomic level or your zip code, while it seems like a neutral piece of data, it can tell someone something more. It might, you know, it might incite a different kind of emotional response or a different kind of presumption around what someone can afford and what someone can't. Should they be offered a certain kind of treatment? Will they be offered a treatment with a particular loan? So it can start to be a little nefarious, especially when there's I mean, HIPAA usually protects those kinds of things, but if certain medical records become available or the usage of your medical credit becomes available, it can create, you know, kind of a tricky situation. So I think sometimes like residents can be, I don't know, it can, there are biases that can be embedded in how that's read for someone. And then I guess also because the medical industry in and of itself was also built largely, or it would be unfair to say that the medical history that we have now is also intertwined with the experimentation on indigenous people and Black enslaved people in the United States. that there are certain biases around also pain. I know the maternal health rates for Black women are extremely high in the United States. Even Serena Williams, who has so much money, spoke about not being catered to. I think even the way blood pressure and oximeters are designed that exclude pigment concentration or melanin concentration. So it's difficult in the health space, and I can't say that I'm a wonderful person about it, but I guess I can recommend Dorothy Roberts. She's an amazing, amazing, amazing scholar. Her work, she works closely with medical professionals, and I think her work might illuminate some more coherent answers than I can. But I think there's a balance between also addressing not just the biases in the data collection, but the medical practice itself, and who's given what and who's considered for what, and are there kind of corrective things if someone is considered lower income. Is there anything that is done in place to make an equitable, to put someone else on another? Does that determine anything, I guess? And then do you have a corrective for that? Things like that. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much for such an excellent talk. And we are out of time. It is 12:01. So I want to thank everyone for attending. Our next talk and our final talk for the Data for Access and Opportunity series is Friday, December 5th from 12 to 1 p.m. And it's titled The Community Information Exchange Initiative in Franklin County and Columbus, Ohio, Translating Data into Action for All Residents Everywhere with Ayaz Hyder. We hope you guys join that. And thank you for joining this talk again. And I hope you guys all have a great weekend.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.